On his birthday, my husband gave a ring to his mistress in front of everyone. But I pulled out my gift that turned the party into a nightmare. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. On my husband's birthday, I prepared a very special gift for him. But he beat me to it, giving a ring to his mistress right in front of everyone. Here's how it all unfolded. Let me start from the beginning. 15 years. That's how long David and I had been married. 15 long years of me being the invisible foundation of his success story, the ghostwriter of his American dream. When we met at a coffee shop near the university campus, he was 28, a struggling architect with grand visions and pockets so empty they echoed. I was 26, fresh out of nursing school with my RN license still warm from the laminator, full of hope and stupidly in love with his passionate speeches about changing skylines and creating spaces that would outlive us both. I was the one who believed in him when nobody else would. Not his parents, who thought architecture was impractical. Not the banks, who saw his portfolio and politely suggested he consider a more stable career path. Not even his friends, who rolled their eyes when he'd sketch building designs on napkins during our double dates. But I saw something in his intensity, in the way his eyes lit up when he talked about sustainable design and urban planning. I thought that fire was for his work, his dreams. I didn't realize then that David's passion had always been more about David than about the dreams themselves. I worked double shifts as a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital to keep us afloat while he built his portfolio. 12-hour days on my feet, dealing with everything from cardiac arrests to drug overdoses, then coming home to find him spread across our tiny kitchen table with blueprints and coffee-stained sketches. I'd massage his shoulders, bring him dinner, listen to him explain his latest concept while my own exhaustion made my bones ache. I was 26 years old and felt 40 most days, but I told myself it was temporary, that we were building something together. I was the one who co-signed every loan, who put my name on every business document just in case something happened to him. I was the one who smiled graciously at every client dinner even when I was so exhausted from back-to-back shifts that I could barely keep my eyes open, playing the supportive wife while men in expensive suits decided whether David's firm was worth their investment. I learned to laugh at jokes I didn't find funny, to nod knowingly when they discussed projects I knew nothing about, to be charming and forgettable in equal measure. The early years were a blur of ramen dinners and secondhand furniture, of me picking up extra weekend shifts while David networked at industry events I couldn't afford to attend. But slowly, painfully, his firm began to grow. First one client, then 3, then a small office space in a converted warehouse downtown. I celebrated every milestone like it was my own victory, because in many ways, it was. Every contract he signed, every building that rose from his blueprints had my fingerprints on it in invisible ink made of sacrifice and support. When our first child, Emma, was born 8 years into our marriage, David was in the middle of his biggest project yet, a mixed-use development that would establish his reputation in the city. I took 6 weeks of maternity leave, then returned to work with breasts that ached from pumping in hospital supply closets, because we needed my insurance and steady income while his business was still unpredictable. 3 years later, when Jake was born, the pattern repeated itself. David's career demands seemed to intensify with each passing year, while mine remained secondary, supportive, essential, but invisible. When his firm finally took off 5 years ago, the year Jake started kindergarten and Emma turned 8, I made what I thought was a mutual decision to step back from my career. "You've sacrificed so much for us," David said, holding my hands across our new granite kitchen island in our new 4-bedroom colonial. "It's time for you to focus on what makes you happy. Maybe take some art classes, volunteer at the kids' school. We can afford it now." What he meant, though I didn't understand it then, was that he could afford to have a wife who wasn't tired all the time, who was available for the kind of entertaining and networking that his growing success demanded. I organized his life with the same meticulous care I'd once used to organize medication schedules and patient charts. I managed his increasingly complex social calendar, coordinated with his assistant about travel arrangements, made sure the house was always ready for impromptu client visits or partner dinners. I raised our 2 kids practically single-handedly, not because David didn't love them, but because his version of love was providing for their future while mine was managing their present. I was the one who stayed up all night with Emma when she had pneumonia, the one who taught Jake to ride a bike, the one who knew which teacher preferred email communication and which one needed face-to-face conferences. David would swoop in for the fun stuff weekend soccer games when he wasn't traveling, bedtime stories when he was home before 8 o'clock. But the daily grind of parenthood was mine alone. I was the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the perfect silent partner who made sure his shirts were pressed and his coffee was ready every morning at 6:30 a.m. sharp. I knew exactly how he liked his eggs. Over easy, with the whites fully set but the yolks still runny, which tie matched which suit, and how to smile graciously when he changed dinner plans at the last minute because a potential client wanted to meet. Our house became a showcase for his success. The kind of place featured in home design magazines, all clean lines and carefully curated art pieces, where the throw pillows were always perfectly arranged and fresh flowers appeared on the dining room table twice a week. I learned to cook elaborate meals for his business associates, to discuss wine pairings and architectural movements with equal confidence, to be the kind of wife who enhanced his professional image without ever overshadowing it. But apparently, perfect wasn't enough. Or maybe perfect was exactly the problem. Maybe what David really wanted wasn't a partner, but an audience. Not a wife, but an accessory that could be upgraded when a newer model caught his eye. The signs started about 8 months ago, so subtle at first that I dismissed them as the normal evolution of a long marriage. Late meetings that stretched into the night, which wasn't unusual given the demands of his growing firm. Business trips that seemed to multiply, taking him to cities where I was sure he'd never mentioned having clients before. The way his phone was always face down on the table now, when for years it had sat there openly, sometimes buzzing with texts from contractors or suppliers that he'd read aloud and laugh about. Then there were the showers. David had always been particular about cleanliness. An architect's precision extended to his personal hygiene, but suddenly he was showering immediately when he came home, before even greeting the kids or asking about my day. He'd walk through the door, kiss my cheek with the same automatic gesture he'd used to hang up his keys, and head straight upstairs. Long day. He'd call over his shoulder. Just need to wash it off. But the thing that really got my attention was the perfume. Chanel No. 5, to be specific. A scent I'd never worn because it gave me headaches, something I'd mentioned to David years ago when we were shopping for my birthday gift, and he'd suggested we stop by the fragrance counter. Chanel gives me migraines, I'd told him, and he'd made a note of it, steered us toward the lighter, more floral scents I actually liked. Yet there it was on his collar, faint but unmistakable, mixing with his usual cologne in a way that made my stomach clench. The first time I noticed it, about 6 months ago, I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. The second time, 3 weeks later, I told myself maybe he'd been in an elevator with someone wearing it. By the third time, I stopped making excuses and started paying attention. Her name was Jessica Rodriguez, and she wasn't just any employee. She was his new project coordinator, hired 8 months earlier, which lined up perfectly with when the late nights and mysterious perfume had started appearing in our lives. I'd met her at a few company events, watched her from across crowded rooms as she laughed a little too loudly at David's jokes, touched his arm a little too often during conversations, stood just a little too close when they were reviewing blueprints together. She was 28, which meant she was exactly my age when David and I had met. Blonde, where I was brunette. Childless, where I was a mother. Available for those urgent evening consultations and weekend site visits that seemed to require David's personal attention more and more frequently. She had the kind of effortless beauty that looked natural in the gym clothes she wore to the office's casual Fridays. The kind of energy that came from sleeping 8 hours a night and not waking up to check on sick children or comfort someone having nightmares. At the company holiday party 6 months ago, I watched them together for the first time with my newly awakened suspicions. The way David's hand lingered on her lower back when he guided her through the crowd. How she looked up at him when he spoke, with the kind of rapt attention I remembered giving him 15 years ago. The way they seemed to have inside jokes, sharing glances across the room that made them both smile in a way that excluded everyone else around them. I could have confronted him that night. Could have pulled him aside during the party, demanded explanations for the perfume and the late nights and the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the room. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the years of trained politeness that made me swallow my words rather than cause a scene. Or maybe, even then, I was already starting to plan. Because here's the thing about being married to someone for 15 years. You learn their patterns, their weaknesses, their blind spots. You learn that David was brilliant at architecture but terrible at details when it came to personal relationships. You learn that he assumed I was too trusting, too comfortable, too invested in our life together to ever question his version of reality. He was wrong about that. Very, very wrong. I could have confronted him. Could have screamed, cried, thrown his clothes on the lawn like in the movies, sent angry text messages to Jessica, made anonymous calls to their office. But I'm not that kind of woman. I'm methodical. I plan ahead. I learned long ago in the chaos of hospital emergency rooms that emotional reactions can kill people, while calm, strategic thinking saves lives. And I was very, very angry. So instead of exploding, I imploded. I turned all that rage inward and transformed it into something much more dangerous. Patience. I continued playing the perfect wife while I quietly, systematically began documenting everything. Every lie, every late night, every fabricated business trip. I started keeping a detailed calendar of David's actual whereabouts versus what he told me, noting patterns and inconsistencies with the same precision I'd once used to track patient symptoms and medication schedules. I hired a private investigator, Marcus Chen, who came highly recommended by a divorced colleague from my nursing days. Marcus was expensive but thorough, the kind of man who could follow someone for weeks without being noticed, who could document infidelity with courtroom-quality evidence. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and I paid his retainer with money from my personal savings account, the one David had stopped paying attention to years ago. I need to know everything, I told Marcus during our first meeting. Where they go, what they do, how long this has been going on. I need photographs, receipts, hotel records if possible. I need enough evidence to prove adultery in court if it comes to that. Marcus nodded, taking notes in a small leather portfolio. Most of my clients want me to stop once they have enough to confront their spouse, he said. You sound like you're planning something bigger. I smiled, the same polite, professional smile I'd perfected during 15 years of client dinners and company parties. I believe in being thorough. Ow. While Marcus worked on gathering evidence, I consulted with the best divorce attorney in the city, Patricia Morrison, a woman whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was matched only by her success rate in high-asset divorce cases. Patricia's office was in a gleaming downtown tower, all marble and mahogany, the kind of place that announced its services cost more per hour than most people made in a week. I need to understand my options, I told her during our initial consultation. My husband has been having an affair, and I want to know exactly what I'm entitled to in a divorce. Patricia leaned back in her leather chair, studying me with the calculating gaze of someone who'd seen hundreds of betrayed spouses sit in that same seat. Tell me about your financial situation. Assets, debts, income streams. How involved have you been in your husband's business? As I outlined our financial picture, Patricia's eyebrows rose steadily higher. The house, worth $2 million. David's firm, which he'd valued at around $3 million when he'd applied for his latest business loan. The lake house we'd bought as an investment property 2 years ago. The retirement accounts, the investment portfolios, the life insurance policies. And then the crucial detail. My name was on everything. Your husband put your name on the business documents? Patricia asked, making notes on her legal pad. All of them. He said it was for tax purposes and in case anything happened to him. I co-signed all the business loans. I'm listed as co-owner on most of the major assets. He wanted to make sure I was protected if something happened to his health or the business. Patricia's smile was sharp as a blade. Mrs. Henderson, I think your husband may have made a very expensive mistake. Over the next 2 months, while I continued playing the devoted wife, Patricia and I quietly began untangling the complex web of David's business and personal finances. What we found was fascinating and deeply satisfying. David's firm was leveraged to the hilt, surviving on a combination of business loans, lines of credit, and the kind of financial juggling that looked impressive from the outside, but was actually quite precarious. More importantly, because I was listed as co-owner or co-signatory on most of the major assets and business documents, I actually had more legal control over our financial situation than David realized. The house was in both our names. The lake property was in both our names. And the business that David thought of as his personal kingdom was legally structured as a partnership, with me holding a majority stake thanks to a restructuring David's accountant had recommended for tax purposes 3 years earlier. He basically handed you control of his entire empire, Patricia told me during one of our clandestine meetings. The question is, what do you want to do with that information? Meanwhile, Marcus was earning every penny of his retainer. The photographs started arriving 2 weeks after I hired him, and they told a story that was both predictable and heartbreaking. David and Jessica at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, entering together on a Tuesday afternoon when he told me he was at a job site. David and Jessica at Bella Vista, the romantic Italian restaurant where he'd taken me for our 10th anniversary, sharing an intimate dinner while I was home helping Emma with her science fair project. The most damning evidence came from their weekend trips. 3 times in 2 months, David had claimed he needed to visit potential clients in other cities. Once to Denver, once to Nashville, once to Charleston. In reality, he and Jessica had spent those weekends at luxury resorts, using credit cards I didn't know existed, staying in honeymoon suites and couples spa packages while I managed soccer tournaments and birthday parties alone. But the photographs were just the beginning. Marcus also discovered financial records that painted an even more troubling picture. David had been spending money we couldn't afford on his affair-expensive restaurants, hotel rooms, jewelry that never made it home to me. He'd opened several credit cards in both our names without telling me, using my excellent credit score to fund his midlife crisis. Most shocking of all was what Marcus found in David's email account. I didn't ask how he gained access, and Marcus didn't volunteer the information. David and Jessica weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future together. David had been researching apartment rentals in Jessica's name, looking into transferring business assets to avoid them being lost in the divorce, even consulting with his own attorney about how to minimize alimony payments. In one particularly revealing email chain, David had written, "Sarah won't fight the divorce. She's too comfortable, too dependent on me to risk a battle. We can be generous with the settlement and she'll take it gratefully. By this time next year, we'll be free to build something real together." Reading those words felt like being punched in the stomach and struck by lightning simultaneously. The casual dismissal of our 15-year marriage, the assumption that I was too weak or too scared to stand up for myself, the complete lack of respect for everything I'd sacrificed to build his career, it crystallized my rage into something pure and focused and absolutely ruthless. That's when I decided exactly how I wanted David's 45th birthday to unfold. The planning took 6 weeks. I told David I wanted to throw him a proper celebration this year, something special to mark not just his birthday, but the success he'd achieved. He loved the idea, of course. David had never met a party focused on him that he didn't enjoy. He left all the details to me, which was perfect for my purposes. I booked the private dining room at the Meridian Club, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. It cost a fortune, but I charged it to one of those secret credit cards David had opened in both our names. If he was going to use my credit score to fund his affair, I could use those same cards to fund his destruction. The guest list was crucial. I invited 35 people, family, friends, business partners, key employees from David's firm, clients he was courting, the mayor, who'd worked with David's firm on several municipal projects, even our kids' teachers and coaches. I wanted an audience that represented every aspect of David's life, professional and personal, public and private. I wanted witnesses who would spread the story far and wide, ensuring that David's humiliation would be complete and permanent. I arranged the seating charts with the precision of a military campaign. David's business partners at table 1, where they'd have a perfect view of the evening's entertainment. His parents and siblings at table 2, close enough to see every detail. Jessica was seated at table 3 with other employees from the firm, close enough to be part of the action, far enough away that she couldn't easily escape. I chose the menu personally. All of David's favorites, including the Chilean sea bass he'd ordered on our first anniversary, and the chocolate souffle he always requested for special occasions. I arranged for his preferred wine pairings, hired his favorite pianist to play background music during dinner, even brought in flowers from the same florist who'd done our wedding 15 years earlier. Every detail was designed to emphasize the significance of the occasion, to make it clear that this was meant to be a celebration of David's life and achievements. I wanted the contrast to be stark when I revealed the truth about who he really was. The photographer was the final piece of the puzzle. I hired Rachel Martinez, the city's most sought-after event photographer, telling her I wanted comprehensive coverage of the evening. "This is a milestone birthday," I explained. "I want to capture every moment, every reaction. Don't worry about being discreet. I want dramatic, emotional shots that tell the story of the night." Rachel was expensive but talented, and she came highly recommended for her ability to capture candid moments that revealed the truth behind public facades. She would be essential for documenting what was about to happen and ensuring that David's humiliation was preserved for posterity. 3 days before the party, I had my final meeting with Patricia Morrison. Everything was ready. The divorce papers were filed and waiting to be served. The asset protection measures were in place. The custody arrangements were drafted with Emma and Jake's best interests carefully documented. Patricia had even arranged for a forensic accountant to be on standby, ready to trace every penny David had spent on his affair and ensure he couldn't hide assets during the divorce proceedings. "Are you sure you want to do it this way?" Patricia asked as we reviewed the final documents. "It's going to be very public, very messy. You could handle this quietly, privately." I thought about David's email, about his casual assumption that I would be grateful for whatever scraps he decided to leave me. I thought about Jessica's hand on his arm at company parties, about the Chanel No. 5 on his shirts, about all the nights I'd waited for him to come home while he was building a new life with someone else. "I'm sure," I said, which brings us to his 45th birthday party, the night I'd been planning for 6 weeks. The culmination of months of careful preparation and quiet rage. Everything was perfect. The Meridian Club's private dining room looked like something from a magazine spread, all warm lighting and elegant floral arrangements. The champagne Veuve Clicquot, David's favorite, flowed freely from the moment guests arrived. The conversation sparkled with the kind of elevated chatter you get when you mix successful professionals with free premium alcohol and excellent food. David held court like the successful man he believed himself to be, moving from table to table with the confident ease of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal Armani I'd bought him for his 40th birthday, and the Rolex his business partners had given him when the firm hit its first million in revenue. He looked every inch the successful architect, the devoted family man, the pillar of the community. I played my part flawlessly, the devoted wife in her elegant black dress. Diane von Furstenberg, classic and understated, chosen specifically to photograph well and appear appropriately dignified in the aftermath of what was coming. I made sure everyone's glasses were full, laughed at the right moments, graciously accepted compliments about the beautiful venue and delicious food. I was utterly, impeccably perfect. Several people commented on what a wonderful wife I was. How lucky David was to have someone who organized such beautiful celebrations. Sarah always makes everything special. His business partner told a table full of nodding heads. David's success wouldn't be possible without her support. If they only knew. Jessica was there too, of course. As his project coordinator, David had insisted when I'd asked about including her on the guest list. She wore a red dress, Valentino, if I wasn't mistaken, certainly more expensive than anything in my closet. And I noticed how David's eyes kept finding her across the room. She was seated at table 3 with other employees from the firm, but David made sure to stop by frequently, ostensibly to check on all his staff but lingering longer at her chair than anywhere else. I watched their interactions with the clinical detachment I'd developed over the past few months. The way his hand brushed her shoulder when he leaned down to speak to her. How she tilted her head to listen, her face turned up toward his with obvious adoration. The private smiles they shared when they thought no one was looking. Except I was always looking now. And I wasn't the only one. I noticed David's mother, Helen, watching their interaction with a puzzled frown. Noticed his business partner's wife, Margaret, exchanging meaningful glances with another woman at their table. Noticed how the conversation at Jessica's table grew quieter whenever David approached, as if the other employees were uncomfortable with the obvious favoritism on display. Perfect. The stage was set exactly as I'd planned it. Dinner was served flawlessly. The Chilean sea bass was perfectly prepared. The wine pairings were sublime, and the chocolate soufflé received enthusiastic applause when it appeared with a single candle for David to blow out. Everyone was in excellent spirits, well-fed and slightly drunk on expensive champagne and the warm glow of celebration. The toast began during dessert, as I'd arranged with the restaurant staff. David's business partner went first, delivering a heartfelt speech about David's vision and dedication, his commitment to sustainable architecture, and his role in transforming the city's skyline. The mayor followed with remarks about David's civic contributions and his firm's work on several high-profile municipal projects. David's father spoke about being proud of his son's achievements, about watching him build something meaningful from nothing. His voice cracked slightly when he talked about how David had become the kind of man who made his family proud, who built not just buildings, but a life of integrity and purpose. I almost felt sorry for the old man. Almost. Each toast built David up higher, painted him as more successful, more admirable, more worthy of respect and celebration. Rachel, the photographer, moved around the room capturing every moment. David's proud smile, the approving nods of his colleagues, the warm applause that followed each speech. This was exactly what I'd wanted. The higher I let them build David up, the further he would fall when I tore him down. Finally, it was time for the main event. David stood up during a natural pause in the conversation, raising his champagne glass to get everyone's attention. The room gradually quieted, all faces turning toward him with the expectant smiles of people anticipating one more heartfelt speech about gratitude and success. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying that confident tone I'd once found attractive but now recognized as arrogance masquerading as charm. "This has been an incredible year for me, both personally and professionally." He paused, looking around the room with that practiced smile that had charmed clients and colleagues for years. "I've been thinking a lot lately about the people who make success possible, about the relationships that really matter in life." My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. I could see where this was headed, and part of me was almost impressed by his audacity. "I want to share this moment with someone who's been particularly supportive of my recent projects," he continued, his eyes finding Jessica across the room. The conversations at nearby tables began to fade as people picked up on the change in David's tone, the sudden weight his words seemed to carry. I watched Jessica's face flush with anticipation, watched David's mother lean forward with a puzzled expression, watched his business partners exchange glances that suggested they sensed something was off but couldn't quite identify what. David walked over to Jessica's table with the kind of theatrical timing he'd always had a talent for. Every eye in the room followed him, the silence now complete except for the soft piano music still playing in the background. "Jessica," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "You've brought fresh energy to everything we do. You've reminded me what it feels like to be excited about the future, to wake up looking forward to each new day." Oh, he was really doing this. In front of our children's teachers, in front of his parents, in front of everyone who'd just spent the evening celebrating what a wonderful, successful, admirable man he was. Then he did it. Right there, in front of our family, our friends, our children's godparents. He pulled out a small velvet box from Tiffany Co. The room went silent. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. I heard his mother gasp, a small, shocked sound that cut through the quiet like a blade. "This is a token of my appreciation," David said, opening the box to reveal not a ring, as I'd expected, but a diamond tennis bracelet that probably cost more than my car. "For all your hard work and dedication, for showing me possibilities I'd forgotten existed." Jessica's face was bright red now, but she extended her wrist anyway, letting him clasp the bracelet around it with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from nerves or excitement, I couldn't tell. A few people started that uncomfortable, polite applause you hear when no one knows what else to do, but it died quickly as the magnitude of what they were witnessing began to sink in. David kissed Jessica's hand. Actually kissed it, right there in front of everyone. And I heard someone at table 2 whisper, "Oh my God." "David," his mother said, her voice tight with embarrassment and growing understanding. "What are you doing?" "Sss." But David was lost in his moment, in his grand romantic gesture, in his delusion that he could somehow make this public declaration and have it be received as anything other than the massive insult to everyone present that it actually was. That's when I stood up. The room's attention shifted to me instantly. 35 pairs of eyes watching to see how the betrayed wife would react to this spectacular public humiliation. Some faces showed pity, others shock, a few barely concealed anticipation for the emotional breakdown they expected to witness. They were all about to be disappointed. "How lovely," I said, my voice cutting through the silence with the kind of calm authority I'd learned in hospital emergency rooms, where panic killed people and steady competence saved lives. "I have a gift too." I reached into my purse, a vintage Chanel bag that had been my grandmother's, chosen specifically because it was large enough to hold everything I needed for this moment, and pulled out a manila envelope. Not quite as elegant as a jewelry box from Tiffany, but infinitely more powerful. "Since we're sharing appreciation publicly tonight," I continued, walking slowly toward the front of the room where Rachel was positioned with her camera, her professional instincts already capturing every moment. "I thought I'd share some things I've been working on as well." David's face went white. I could see the exact moment he realized this wasn't going to be a tearful confrontation or a dramatic exit. This was something else entirely, something he hadn't prepared for. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "What are you—" "Oh, just some paperwork," I said sweetly, the same tone I'd used thousands of times when calming anxious patients or their families. "You know how I love to be organized." I opened the envelope and pulled out the first photograph in 8:10 glossy print that Marcus had delivered just that morning. The image was crystal clear. David and Jessica entering the Ritz-Carlton downtown, his hand on her lower back, her face turned up toward his in obvious intimacy. The timestamp showed Tuesday, March 15th, 2:30 p.m. "This is from the Ritz-Carlton last Tuesday," I announced, holding up the photograph so the entire room could see it. "The day you told me you were at the Henderson Project site all afternoon, dealing with foundation issues." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the soft jazz piano still playing in the background, absurdly cheerful given the circumstances. I watched faces around the room as the implications sank in. David's mother pressing her hand to her mouth, his business partner's wife whispering urgently to her husband, Jessica looking like she wanted to disappear into her red Valentino dress. "And this," I continued, pulling out another photograph with the same theatrical timing David had used for his bracelet presentation, "is from the Bella Vista restaurant 3 weeks ago, March 8th to be precise. I believe you told me you were having dinner with the Morrison Group about their new headquarters project?" This photograph showed David and Jessica in an intimate corner booth at the city's most romantic restaurant, David's hand covering hers across the candlelit table, both of them laughing with the kind of obvious joy that spoke of new love and shared secrets. "I have about 30 more of these," I said conversationally, as if I were discussing the weather or commenting on the excellent soufflé. "But I don't want to bore everyone with a complete slideshow." The private investigator was very thorough. Marcus Chen. Perhaps some of you know his work? He comes highly recommended in certain circles. The gasps around the room were audible now. I saw David's business partner lean back in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to something much harder and more calculating. The mayor's wife was staring at Jessica with unconcealed disgust. David's father looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes. David found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. "Sarah, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing everyone here." "Am I?" I tilted my head, considering his words with the same clinical detachment I'd once used to assess patient symptoms. Well, then maybe I should share something even more interesting. I reached into the envelope again and pulled out a folder, leather-bound, official-looking, the kind of thing that screamed legal documentation. "Did everyone know that David's been having some financial difficulties lately?" I asked, looking around the room with genuine curiosity, as if I were conducting a poll rather than destroying my husband's reputation. Show of hands who here knew that Henderson Architecture owes over $2 million in outstanding loans and credit obligations? The silence was deafening. I saw several faces around the room register genuine surprise. David's success story had been carefully curated, but the reality was much messier, much more precarious than anyone realized. See, David's firm has been surviving on a combination of business loans, lines of credit, and some very creative accounting practices. I continued, opening the folder to reveal official-looking documents. Which is why he's been asking me to co-sign more loans recently, to put more assets in my name for tax purposes and estate planning. Very romantic, really. Asking your wife to guarantee your debts while you buy jewelry for your mistress. I pulled out a specific document, holding it up so the letterhead was visible to those close enough to see. This is particularly interesting. It's a deed transfer for our lake house. You know, the beautiful property on Lake Morrison that David loves to take clients to, where he's hosted some of you for weekend retreats. David was gripping the back of Jessica's chair now, his knuckles white against the dark wood. Jessica herself looked like she was going to be sick. David said he wanted to gift the lake house to me last month. Such a generous husband, right? Except he wasn't planning to gift it to me at all. I smiled directly at Jessica, whose face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. He was planning to transfer it to you, sweetheart. Had all the paperwork drawn up and everything, ready to execute as soon as our divorce was finalized. I heard someone at table 3 whisper, "Oh my God." Fortunately, I continued, I found the documents before he could execute them. And even more fortunately, I discovered something fascinating about our financial situation that David seems to have overlooked in his rush to start his new life. I pulled out another set of documents, these even more official-looking than the first. It turns out that when you've been married for 15 years and you've co-signed everything, when you've put your name on every business loan and every major asset acquisition, you accumulate quite a bit of legal authority. More authority than your husband realizes, apparently. David was shaking now, visibly trembling as he began to understand the scope of what I'd discovered and prepared. "For instance," I said, flipping through the papers with the casual ease of someone discussing a shopping list. "Did you know that thanks to a business restructuring David's accountant recommended 3 years ago for tax purposes, of course, I actually own 62% of Henderson Architecture?" David thought he was being so clever, putting assets in my name to protect them from potential lawsuits or business liability. What he didn't realize is that those legal protections work both ways. The room was completely silent now, except for the sound of people breathing and the distant clatter of dishes from the restaurant's main dining room. Even the piano music had stopped at some point, though I hadn't noticed when. "But wait," I said, channeling every infomercial I'd ever seen. "There's more." I reached into the envelope one final time and pulled out the document I'd been saving for last, the one that would end not just this evening, but David's entire carefully constructed life. "These are divorce papers," I announced, holding up the official court documents. "I filed them this morning. David will be served officially on Monday morning at his office. I thought it would be more professional that way. but I decided he should hear about it tonight, surrounded by everyone who's spent the evening celebrating what a wonderful, successful, devoted family man he is. The silence that followed was so profound it felt physical, like a weight pressing down on the entire room. I could see people processing what they'd just witnessed, the complete destruction of everything they thought they knew about David Henderson, successful architect and devoted husband. The best part, I continued, my voice steady and calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, is that thanks to all those documents David had me sign to protect our assets, I actually have controlling interest in almost everything he thinks he owns. The business, the properties, even the car he drove here tonight. It's all legally mine as much as his. Funny how paperwork works, isn't it? I looked directly at Jessica, who was still wearing David's expensive bracelet like a scarlet letter made of diamonds. Jessica, honey, I hope you enjoyed that bracelet because it's probably going to be the most expensive piece of jewelry you'll ever receive from David. Unless you're planning to help him pay his legal fees. I hear divorce attorneys are quite expensive, especially when the case involves adultery and financial misconduct. David finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak than actual speech. You can't do this. You can't. This is insane. You're destroying everything we've built together. Everything I built, I corrected gently. Everything I supported, funded, guaranteed, and made possible while you were busy building something else entirely with someone else entirely. I closed the folder and tucked it back into my purse, then looked around the room one final time, making eye contact with as many people as possible. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. This has indeed been a very special birthday for David. Memorable, I think you'll agree. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. I picked up my purse, walked over to David, and held out the manila envelope containing all the remaining photographs and documents. Happy birthday, darling, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, but gentle enough to sound almost loving. I think this is one you'll remember forever. Then I walked out. I didn't run, didn't storm, didn't slam doors or make dramatic exits. I simply walked out with the same calm dignity I'd maintained throughout the entire evening, leaving behind a room full of shocked faces and one very thoroughly destroyed man. The aftermath was everything I'd hoped for and more. The story spread through our social circle like wildfire fueled, no doubt, by the 35 witnesses who'd watched David's spectacular downfall unfold in real time. Rachel, the photographer, had captured everything, and while I'd hired her for documentation purposes, several guests had asked for copies of the photos for their own records. Within 48 hours, David's business partners were calling emergency meetings to discuss the leadership structure of the firm. When word spread that David's personal life was in shambles and that his wife actually owned a controlling interest in the company, several clients began reconsidering their contracts. The mayor quietly removed David from the Municipal Buildings Committee. The country club started making polite inquiries about whether the Henderson family membership would be continuing. Jessica, meanwhile, transferred to another architectural firm within 2 weeks. Apparently, the thrill of dating a successful older man loses its appeal when that man's wife owns his business, he's facing financial ruin, and your romantic relationship has become the talk of the entire professional community. She also returned the diamond bracelet through David's attorney, with a note saying she felt it was inappropriate to keep under the circumstances. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new downtown condominium, a sleek, modern space in the city's most prestigious building, purchased with my share of the business assets, when Patricia Morrison called to tell me the divorce was finalized. The settlement had been even better than we'd initially projected. I'd kept 62% of the architectural firm, which I'd immediately put up for sale to the highest bidder. Full ownership of the lake house, generous alimony and child support, and primary custody of Emma and Jake. David had tried to fight the settlement at first, claiming I'd manipulated him into signing documents he didn't understand. But when Patricia presented the evidence of his adultery, his financial deception, and his attempts to transfer marital assets without my knowledge, his own attorney had advised him to accept our terms rather than face the potential criminal charges for financial fraud. The final irony was that David's affair had actually made me financially independent for the first time in my adult life. The sale of my majority stake in Henderson Architecture, combined with the divorce settlement, left me with more money than I'd ever imagined having. I could go back to nursing if I wanted to, or pursue something entirely different. For the first time in 15 years, my future was entirely my own to decide. That evening, after Patricia's call, I was celebrating with a glass of wine on my condo's balcony when my phone rang. It was Mark Stevens, Patricia's associate who'd handled much of the financial investigation for my divorce case. Over the course of our professional relationship, I'd noticed that Mark seemed to appreciate my strategic thinking as much as my appearance. Unlike my ex-husband, he seemed to find intelligence attractive rather than threatening. "I heard your divorce was finalized today," he said. "I was wondering if you'd like to celebrate with dinner. I know a place that serves excellent wine and has no associations with your previous life whatsoever." I looked out over the city skyline, at the lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness, at the vast expanse of possibilities stretching out before me. "I'd like that very much," I said. Because here's what I learned from 15 years of marriage to David Henderson. The best revenge isn't getting mad, isn't getting even getting everything. The best revenge is getting free from the lies, free from the betrayal, free from the suffocating role of the perfect wife who makes everyone else's dreams possible while abandoning her own. David turned 45 with a party he'll never forget, surrounded by everyone who mattered to him, in the moment when he thought he was claiming his happiness at my expense. Instead, he got to watch his entire life implode in real time, documented by a professional photographer and witnessed by everyone whose opinion he valued. I turned over a new leaf with a life I'll never regret, funded by the assets he'd put in my name to protect himself, surrounded by possibilities I'd forgotten existed. Some gifts really do keep on giving. And sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the truth, served publicly, with perfect timing, and absolutely no mercy. 6 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that David had moved to Phoenix, where he was working for a mid-level firm designing strip malls and commercial buildings. He'd declared bankruptcy, lost his professional reputation, and was living in a one-bedroom apartment, driving a used Honda instead of his beloved BMW. Jessica, meanwhile, had gotten engaged to another architect, someone closer to her own age, with a better financial situation and no messy divorce in his recent past. As for me, I was planning my second date with Mark, considering a master's degree in healthcare administration, and teaching my children that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for yourself, especially when it's terrifying and difficult and everyone expects you to be polite and accepting instead. Emma asked me once if I was sorry about how everything happened, if I wished I'd handled it differently. I told her the truth. I was sorry it had been necessary, but I wasn't sorry I'd done it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept less than you deserve, even if that means everyone else gets uncomfortable in the process. That's a lesson I hope she never needs to use, but I'm glad she knows it's available if she does. After all, some gifts are meant to last a lifetime. Tennis bracelet that probably cost more than our family vacation. For all your hard work and dedication. Jessica's face flushed as she extended her wrist, letting him clasp the bracelet around it. A few people started that uncomfortable, polite applause you hear when no one knows what else to do. "David," his mother whispered, her voice tight with embarrassment. He kissed Jessica's hand. Actually kissed it, right there in front of everyone. That's when I stood up. "How lovely," I said, my voice cutting through the awkward silence. "I have a gift, too." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Not quite as elegant as a jewelry box, but infinitely more powerful. "Since we're sharing appreciation publicly tonight," I continued, walking to the front of the room where the photographer was still standing, looking confused. "I thought I'd share some things I've been working on, too." David's face went white. "Sarah, what are you— Oh, just some paperwork," I said sweetly. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first photograph. "This is from the Ritz-Carlton last Tuesday, the day you told me you were at the Henderson project site." I held up the 8x10 glossy print of David and Jessica entering the hotel, his hand on her lower back, her face turned up toward his in obvious intimacy. The room was dead silent now. "And this," I continued, pulling out another photo, "is from the Bella Vista restaurant 3 weeks ago. I believe you told me you were having dinner with potential clients." This one showed them in an intimate corner booth, David's hand covering hers across the table, both of them laughing. "I have about 30 more of these, but I don't want to bore everyone," I said conversationally. The private investigator was very thorough. David found his voice. "Sarah, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I pulled out a folder. "Well, then maybe I should share something even more interesting. Did everyone know that David's been having financial troubles?" I saw several faces around the room register surprise. David's success story was carefully curated, but the reality was messier. See, his firm owes quite a bit of money, which is why he's been asking me to co-sign more loans, put more assets in my name for tax purposes. I made air quotes. "Very romantic, asking your wife to guarantee your debts while you buy jewelry for your mistress." I pulled out a document. "This is particularly interesting. It's the deed transfer for our lake house, the one David said he wanted to gift to me last month. Except he wasn't planning to gift it to me at all. Were you, darling?" David was gripping the back of a chair now, his knuckles white. He was planning to transfer it to Jessica, had all the paperwork drawn up and everything. Fortunately, I found the documents before he could execute them. I smiled at Jessica, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her red dress. "Surprise, sweetheart? That romantic weekend getaway he promised you?" "I own it." Someone at table 3 whispered, "Oh my God." "But wait," I said, channeling every shopping channel host I'd ever seen. "There's more." I pulled out the final document. "These are divorce papers. I filed them this morning. David will be served officially tomorrow, but I thought it would be more fun to let him know tonight, surrounded by everyone who's watched him play the devoted husband for years." The silence was deafening. David's mother had her hand over her mouth. Our kids' teacher, who we'd invited because David always insisted on appearing family-oriented, was staring at her plate. "The best part," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "is that thanks to all those documents David had me sign to protect our assets, I actually own 60% of his business. Turns out when you're having an affair, you don't read the fine print on what your wife's attorney slips into the stack." David finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can. I did. And I'm just getting started." I looked around the room. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This has indeed been a very special birthday for David. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their dinner." I picked up my purse, walked over to David, and handed him the envelope with the remaining photos and documents. "Happy birthday, darling," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think this is one you'll remember forever." Then I walked out. The aftermath was everything I'd hoped for and more. The story spread through our social circle like wildfire. David's business partners were very interested in reviewing their contracts once they learned about our impending divorce and my majority ownership. Several clients decided they preferred working with firms that had more stable leadership. Jessica transferred to another company within 2 weeks. Apparently, the thrill of dating a successful older man loses its appeal when that man's wife owns his business and he's facing financial ruin. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new downtown condo purchased with my share of the business sale when my lawyer called to tell me the divorce was finalized. I'd kept the lake house, secured generous alimony and child support, and maintained my dignity throughout the entire process. That evening, my attorney Mark, who'd been handling my case with impressive dedication, asked if I'd like to celebrate with dinner. He'd been subtly flirting throughout our professional relationship, and I'd noticed how his eyes lit up when he talked about strategy. Unlike my ex-husband, Mark seemed to appreciate a woman who could plan ahead. I said yes, because the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even, getting everything, and getting a fresh start with someone who values intelligence as much as they do beauty. David turned 45 with a party he'll never forget. I turned over a new leaf with a life I'll never regret. Some gifts keep on giving.